Imagine a single family so wealthy they could bend popes, kings, and entire republics to their will. A family whose money launched the Renaissance, whose enemies filled graveyards, and whose legacy still glows on every Florentine street corner today. This is not myth. This is the Medici. For 3 centuries, they transformed a modest banking clan into one of the most influential dynasties in European history. They elevated Florence from a regional republic into the beating heart of Renaissance creativity. They created popes, crowned queens, commanded armies, produced philosophers, shaped artists, and fought anyone who dared stand in their way. Today, in partnership with Paradox Interactive for the launch of Europa Universalis V, we dive into the epic rise, ruthless power, and dramatic collapse of history's most influential bankers. In the heart of Tuscany, beneath the golden sun that poured over its rolling hills, there once rose a city, so dazzling in brilliance that Europe itself turned its eyes toward it. Florence, a city where art erupted like spring flowers, where scholars debated the secrets of the ancients, and where wealth flowed like the Arno River. But behind this beauty, behind this rebirth of genius, there stood a single family, mysterious, brilliant, feared, beloved, and unforgettable. The Medici, a dynasty that shaped Florence not through crowns or armies, but through wit, gold, and a talent for surviving storms that would have destroyed lesser men. This is their story, the rise, the dominance, the cultural explosion, and the final fading light of the magnificent Medici. The tale begins before Florence was the jewel of Europe. In the 13th century, when Italy was a fractured land of rival republics, papal ambitions, merchant guilds, and noble intrigue, a small, unassuming family from the Mugello region stepped quietly into the arena. They were not yet kings, not yet patrons of great cathedrals or masters of diplomacy. They were simply the Medici, workers tied to guilds, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of Florence, and Florence itself was changing. Cloth making, trade routes, currency exchange, and the birth of international banking were transforming the city from a local republic into an economic powerhouse. Amid this shifting world, one Medici changed the course of history. Giovanni di Bicci. He built his wealth not with extravagance, but with discipline and modesty. 2 wool workshops gave him capital, and with that capital he crafted the Medici Bank, the engine that would carry his family to heights unimaginable. Giovanni understood Florence better than most. He stayed humble, walked among the people, and earned their trust. In a world where nobles flaunted wealth like armor, Giovanni wielded modesty as a weapon far more potent. Yet Florence was never free from rivalry. The Albizzi, one of the city's most dominant families, viewed the rising Medici as a threat. Their fear would prove justified, for Giovanni's son, Cosimo di Bicci, transformed the Medici Bank into the most powerful financial institution in Europe. Branches spread across the continent, from Venice to Munich. Even the Pope himself banked with the Medici. But success breeds enemies, and Cosimo's political influence became too great to ignore. Backed by the Albizzi, Florence exiled him. For a moment, it seemed the Medici story might end in quiet failure. But exile did not weaken Cosimo, it forged him. Only a year later, a shift in Florentine politics brought him home, stronger than ever. With alliances, wealth, and a deep understanding of the city's political web, Cosimo returned triumphant. He strengthened Florence's influence, sponsored Byzantine scholars fleeing the crumbling Eastern Empire, and poured his resources into artistic creation, supporting talents like Donatello. When he passed away in 1462, the people honored him with a title once reserved for founders of nations, Father of the Fatherland. His successors inherited a city shaped by ambition and art. Piero, limited by illness, maintained the family's status, but it was his son, Lorenzo, who became the beating heart of Florence. Lorenzo de' Medici il Magnifico, born in 1449, educated by humanist scholars, raised among poets and philosophers, Lorenzo carried the Renaissance in his veins. He ruled Florence not from a throne, but from salons, galleries, and diplomatic chambers. And yet even a man as beloved as Lorenzo could not escape the shadows of Florence's political world. The Pazzi family, fueled by bitterness, aligned with Pope Sixtus Roman IV to bring him down. Their plot reached its bloody climax in 1478. Inside the cathedral, on a Sunday morning, assassins struck. Lorenzo survived. His brother Giuliano did not. The city erupted. Retribution swept through Florence. The Pope excommunicated Lorenzo and launched an invasion, but Lorenzo's charisma was as powerful as any army. He rallied Florence, negotiated with Naples, and emerged from the crisis with Florence still standing and the Pazzi legacy reduced to ashes. Yet even the Magnifico was flawed. His mismanagement weakened the Medici Bank, and public funds were strained, but his cultural legacy was unmatched. He transformed Florence into the intellectual capital of Europe. Still, storms were gathering. One of them was a Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola, a fiery preacher who condemned corruption, art, luxury, and the elites who indulged in them. Lorenzo invited him, hoping to strengthen Florence's religious institutions. But Savonarola became a force Lorenzo could not control. After Lorenzo's death, when France invaded Italy under Charles Roman VIII, the Medici faltered. Savonarola seized the moment. With the people behind him, he drove the Medici out and turned Florence into a city of Puritan austerity, culminating in the infamous bonfire of the Vanities. But the Pope crushed Savonarola soon after, and Florence executed him in the Piazza della Signoria. With the friar gone, Florence once again shifted, and by 1512 the Medici returned. Their golden age was about to begin. The Medici no longer played only in Florence. They now played in Europe. They became dukes, queens, and even popes. Pope Leo X and Pope Clement Roman VII, both Medici transformed the Vatican with their artistic patronage and political maneuvering. One brought the Church to the brink of bankruptcy out of love for beauty. The other faced the sack of Rome during the turbulent early years of the Reformation. Their influence stretched across kingdoms. Catherine de' Medici ruled France as queen and regent, navigating a world of religious wars and political chaos. Maria de' Medici followed decades later, elevating powerful figures like Cardinal Richelieu before being outmaneuvered and cast aside. Even in exile and scandal, the Medici spirit of survival endured. Meanwhile, in Florence, Medici dukes reshaped the political landscape. Alessandro ruled first, followed by Cosimo I Cosimo the Great, who defeated his enemies and transformed Florence into the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Under him, Tuscany became a unified, centralized state, its influence radiating across Italy. But no dynasty lasts forever. By the 17th century, the Medici flame dimmed. Grand Duke Ferdinando Roman II still patronized artists and scientists, but power was fading. Wealth contracted, leadership weakened. By the early 1700s, Tuscany was nearly bankrupt. Cosimo Roman III tried desperately to restore old glory, but failed. His heir, Gian Gaston, died childless, and so ended the main Medici line. Their last surviving heiress, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici, signed away the duchy to the Holy Roman Empire, but ensured that every Medici treasure, every masterpiece, every architectural wonder, remained in Florence forever. A final gift to a city that had risen and fallen with them. After centuries of wars, invasions, and political changes, Tuscany was folded into the modern Kingdom of Italy. The Medici name dispersed into noble houses across Europe. But their legacy, impossible to erase, remains. Walk the streets of Florence today and their fingerprints cover everything: the domes, the chapels, the palaces, the paintings, the sculptures, the plazas. Their patronage birthed giants Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Machiavelli, Ficino. Their banking system transformed European finance. Their politics shaped the papacy, France, and Italy alike. Their brilliance, ambition, greed, genius, corruption, imagination, and resilience rebuilt a civilization. The Renaissance was not merely a historical period. It was a revolution in thought, beauty, and human potential. And at its center, standing boldly in the swirl of art, war, religion, conspiracy, and genius, stood the Medici, a family who turned Florence into the brightest flower in all of Tuscany, a family who changed Western history forever. More Renaissance stories are coming your way. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell is pressed so you never miss our deep dives into the past. Like, comment, and share. Your support brings these stories to life. Members and patrons gain access to hundreds of exclusive videos, early releases, our private Discord, and much more. When the Medici finally entered Florence, they arrived not as nobles but as determined newcomers searching for opportunity. Florence was unlike anything they had known in the quiet Mugello Valley. It was alive, fierce, ambitious, a city where fortunes shifted like the flow of the Arno River, and where every street hummed with competition, trade, conflict, and brilliance. Tall stone towers cast long shadows over narrow streets. Merchants shouted prices across crowded markets. Craftsmen hammered metal in open workshops. And the scent of bread, wool, smoke, and river water blended into a perfume unique to the city. It was here, in this restless and thriving world, that the Medici would find the soil more fertile than the farmlands they had left behind. Florence in the 14th century was a battlefield disguised as a marketplace. Power belonged to the guilds, associations of merchants and craftsmen who controlled every aspect of the city's economy. From wool workers to goldsmiths to judges, each guild had its own reach, its own laws, its own influence. Whoever controlled the guilds controlled Florence, and whoever could win the trust of the guilds could rise. For the Medici, this was both a challenge and an opening. Their first steps were quiet ones. They began by working in the wool trade, one of the city's most lucrative industries. Wool was the heartbeat of Florence's wealth. It flowed into Europe as fine cloth worn by nobles, bishops, and kings. Every stage, shearing, dyeing, weaving, selling required precision, trust, and money. The Medici learned fast, earned faster, and displayed a quality that set them apart: honesty in a city where deceit was common. Florentines noticed, customers returned, word spread, yet business alone would not be enough. The true engine of Florence's greatness was not wool, silk, or even art, it was banking. And banking in the 14th century was something dangerous, a mixture of risk, mathematics, politics, and above all, trust. A banker could rise higher than nobles, but one mistake could mean ruin. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the man who would guide the family into its destiny, understood this better than anyone. He was quiet, intelligent, patient, and alert, a man who watched far more than he spoke. Unlike the loud merchants who boasted about every sale, Giovanni studied the patterns of wealth in Florence. He saw how money moved, how guilds rose and fell, how political winds shifted, and how families lost everything through pride. While others chased glory, Giovanni built foundations. He began working for established bankers, learning how to keep ledgers, assess risks, evaluate clients, and make loans. He saw how other bankers collapsed by gambling on unstable ventures or angering powerful families. Giovanni discovered a principle that would define the Medici Bank for decades. Strength comes not from boldness, but from stability. Slowly, he built relationships not with the loudest men in Florence, but with reliable merchants, steady craftsmen, and foreign traders. He became the man people trusted with their savings, their contracts, their inheritance, their disputes. In a time when trust was rare, Giovanni treated it as treasure, and trust turned into opportunity. When a small banking house faced financial trouble, Giovanni purchased it. It was not an impressive building, a modest stone structure near the center of Florence, but within those walls, the seeds of a global empire were planted. Giovanni was not yet wealthy, but he had something more important: vision. Florence was expanding beyond its borders. European trade routes stretched to France, England, the Low Countries, and the Papal Court in Rome. Each region needed bankers. Each city needed someone dependable. Giovanni was ready. The Medici Bank began with simple services, money exchange, safe storage, modest loans. But Giovanni added something revolutionary: ethical banking. He refused corrupt deals, avoided risky ventures, and never humiliated those who struggled to repay. He offered second chances, fair contracts, and humane treatment. Soon, merchants were whispering the same phrase across Florence: the Medici can be trusted. And in Florence, trust was more profitable than gold. As the bank grew, Giovanni earned the favor of the powerful Wool Guild, which governed trade and held immense political influence. Acceptance into the guild gave him legitimacy, respect, a place at the table where Florence's future was negotiated. This was not just upward mobility, it was entry into the heart of power. But Giovanni was not interested in power for its own sake. He understood that Florence was fragile, always divided between rival families, factions, and political storms. He lived through the Black Death, economic collapse, and violent uprisings. He knew that a banking empire could not stand on unstable ground. So he invested not only in business, but in people. He quietly supported scholars, artists, craftsmen, and ordinary families. He repaired churches, funded community needs, and paid for improvements across Florence. While other merchants built wealth for themselves, Giovanni built the foundations of a city that would eventually support his family in return. His modesty fooled his rivals. They saw him as a simple banker, pleasant and predictable. They did not realize that his influence was growing beneath the surface, like roots spreading unseen through the soil. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. The papacy needed bankers. The church, the single largest, wealthiest, and most influential institution in Europe, required a bank it could rely on. Giovanni's reputation reached Rome. When he secured the role of managing the papal finances, the Medici family entered a new era. Suddenly, the Medicis were no longer just Florentine bankers. They became the financial backbone of the Catholic world. The revenue was immense, the prestige greater, the networks global. Florence began to feel their presence in every corner. The Medici Bank expanded to Venice, Rome, Geneva, Bruges, and London. Their sigil, the 6 red balls, appeared on buildings across Europe. Their influence touched merchants, priests, nobles, monarchs. What began in a small stone building now stretched across the continent. Giovanni led with caution, humanity, and strategy. He never flaunted his wealth, he never provoked rivals. But he positioned the family so wisely that by the time he died in 1429, the Medici were no longer modest traders from Mugello, they were one of the most respected families in Florence. And he had prepared his son, Cosimo, to carry the torch further than he ever could. Cosimo de' Medici would soon become the most powerful man in Florence, not through violence or titles, but through intelligence, charm, diplomacy, wealth, and the ability to sway hearts. The story of the Medici is not the story of a family born into greatness, but of a family that built greatness, brick by brick, choice by choice, generation by generation. They began in the soil of Mugello with nothing more than discipline, unity, and the belief that life could be bigger than the horizon they were born under. From those quiet valleys they carried their hunger into Florence, a city that devoured the weak and lifted only the relentless. But the Medici were not intimidated, they observed, they learned, they adapted. And where others chased glory, they built foundations. What began as modest trade became a banking empire that became a political dynasty that became the beating heart of the Renaissance. The Medici proved that power is not seized in a moment, it is earned in silence, protected with intelligence, and strengthened through service. They funded the dreams of artists, the breakthroughs of scientists, and the rise of thinkers whose ideas still shape our world today. Every cathedral dome, every marble statue, every revolutionary painting tied to their name whispers the same truth. The greatest legacy is the one built not for yourself, but for generations yet unborn. Their journey is a reminder that destiny is never inherited, it is carved. That influence does not come from titles, but from the courage to redefine what is possible. The Medici did not wait for permission to rise. They created their own opportunity, their own wealth, their own future. They chose patience over pride, strategy over impulse, humility over ego, and these choices forged a dynasty that turned a city into a cradle of genius. In the end, their power faded, their titles dissolved, their wealth dispersed. But the world they shaped outlived them. The art they protected, the ideas they nurtured, the architecture they built, the minds they empowered, all of it remains. Their story stands as proof that true greatness is not measured by how loudly one rules, but by how deeply one impacts humanity. If a humble family from a silent valley can change the course of history, then every beginning, no matter how small, carries within it the possibility of an empire. The Medici story is not just history, it is a challenge, a declaration, a promise that with vision, discipline, and unshakable belief, even the simplest origins can ignite a legacy bright enough to illuminate centuries.